What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Pack a Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Please make sure to subscribe, like, comment if you have not already. Today's main topic is going to be what exactly Green Bay has the capability of doing this offseason. This is going to be a 3 or 4 part series. I want to go one by one. Today, we're going to go with an all-in approach. What happens if Green Bay goes all in, brings Aaron Rodgers back, and tries to win another Super Bowl this season, or tries to win, emphasis on tries. What happens if there is some sort of middle ground, either with Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love at quarterback, and then what happens if they go the full rip the Band-Aid approach. So we'll jump into part 1 of that series in just a moment. Before we get there, a couple pieces of news and notes from Monday. The first is, of course, that the Cowboys beat the Buccaneers in convincing fashion. A couple questions come out of that game. Do the Cowboys actually have a kicker? That was crazy. A lot of missed extra points in that game. More importantly, was that Tom Brady's last game in the NFL? In my opinion, the greatest of all time, best to ever do it, first ballot Hall of Famer, no question about it. And we'll see if that was his last game. I tend to believe he'll come back. The next question would be, if he comes back, is it with Tampa or with another team? I tend to think it's probably with another team, but anytime you have a player that's certainly that age, which Brady is, setting the standard for how long a player can play at that position, it's always a question. And when you have a player of that magnitude potentially playing in his last game, that's always something that you just have to question and wonder if that was in fact his last game in the NFL. Like I said, I don't think it is, but it'll definitely be something to monitor for the remainder of this offseason. And even once we get an announcement, if it's a retirement, we can't fully trust it because, of course, he came back after announcing his retirement last season. So we'll see what happens. But like I said, my hunch right now is that he's back probably on some other team, but will definitely be worth monitoring. Meanwhile, with Tom Brady eliminated from the playoffs, there are 8 quarterbacks remaining, 8 teams remaining, 8 starting quarterbacks remaining. Those 8 starting quarterbacks are of the following age: 23, 23, 24, 25, 26, 26, 27, 29. Dak Prescott is the oldest remaining starting quarterback of the final 8 teams in the playoffs at age 29 years old. So a significant youth movement. 6 of the remaining 8 are 26 or younger, which is really incredible to think about just how young this group of quarterbacks that are going to be competing for a Super Bowl is. And I think it goes hand in hand with what we talked about yesterday with potentially moving on from Aaron Rodgers. You look at how the older quarterbacks have fared this season, from Tom Brady to Aaron Rodgers to Matt Ryan to the list goes on. It was not exactly a great season for the older quarterbacks in the NFL. The younger quarterbacks are the ones that had a bit more success and are moving on to the final 8 of this playoff. So that will be something to really consider as Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, Russ Ball, etc. decide what they want to do at the quarterback position this coming offseason. Meanwhile, the one other news or noteworthy item that apparently might just be news to me, and even if it's not, I'm probably the only one that cares about it. As I was going through the Packers roster and salary cap and everything, one of the unique things that I noticed, which I just had not known, is that Vernon Scott was no longer on the roster. Now, back in August, Vernon Scott had been released with an injury designation, which I think basically put Vernon Scott out of most people's minds. However, because nobody claimed him, he reverted to injured reserve and had been on injured reserve, at least as far as I had known, for a while. If you go to Over the Cap or Spotrac or any of the salary cap sites, as of today, he is still listed on the Packers roster, on their active roster. You go to Packers.com and he is not listed anywhere there. So you go to Our Lads, he's still listed on their depth charts there. So there seems to have been some confusion along the way at some point, whether or not Vernon Scott is actually still on the roster or not. But as far as I can tell and as far as I can see, talked with Wes Hodkiewicz as well, it seems like Vernon Scott is in fact no longer a member of the Green Bay Packers. So maybe you knew that already. I couldn't find confirmation anywhere online or that, the Packers sent out a final confirmation on anything. They don't usually do that sometimes with injury settlements, but long story short, does not seem like Vernon Scott is on the roster any longer. All right. Moving forward, today's episode, as mentioned, is going to be the first in a series that I'll be doing as to what Green Bay could potentially do this offseason. So today is going to be the all-in approach. Aaron Rodgers is back. They decide to mortgage more from the future and decide to build a team that they think can win the Super Bowl in 2023. Now, before I jump in, and I'm going to bring a fancy Excel spreadsheet behind me in just a moment, we're going to go through everything in great detail. I cannot stress to you enough. We're going to go through a full offseason. We're going to go through some trades. We're going to go through some cuts. We're going to go through some free agent signings. We're going to go through a draft. I cannot stress this enough. Do not get caught up with the names of the players that I signed or drafted. 90% of the players that I drafted in my mock draft simulator, I don't even know a thing about them yet because I'm not that far in my draft evaluations. So they don't matter. Don't put it to, don't put it as canon as what I think they're going to do. This is an exercise in showing what type of salary cap space the Green Bay Packers can open, how they could potentially fill some of those holes, and just how you could potentially massage and maneuver this roster so that you could put together a competitive team that could theoretically compete for a Super Bowl in 2023. So with that in mind, don't get caught up on the names. But with that in mind, here, without any further ado, is my all-in offseason for the Green Bay Packers. All right, so as you can see, I have my handy dandy Excel spreadsheet right behind me. Last thing before I jump into this is I just want to give a huge shout out once again to Over the Cap, Spotrac, as well as Ken Ingalls for all of their salary cap work. The vast majority of these numbers you're going to find are from Spotrac, Over the Cap, and Ken and their work on the salary cap. So very much appreciative of those three groups, organizations / people for all the work that they put in all season long for their salary cap numbers. But what I want to do today is just basically go through what this current salary cap looks like, if Green Bay decides to go all in, how they could go about doing that, and what type of roster they could assemble. So I'll say it one more time, don't get too caught up on the name. So what you're looking at right now is basically where Green Bay sits salary cap wise as we speak. Now, one other quick caveat, this isn't like 1,000,000% to the exact dollar and cent. It is like 99.8% accurate as far as I can tell. There may be a couple rounding errors, a small accounting error here or there. Ultimately, it's irrelevant. This is all going to be well within the realm of possibility for what Green Bay can do this upcoming offseason. So let's jump in right away. This is the current situation. Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Danny Etling as your quarterbacks currently, Christian Watson, Dobbs, Toure, Melton, Cotton. We've got Jones, Dillon, Taylor, Goodson at running back. You guys know the team as is. A couple quick notes that we have right here. Yosh Nijman, I did give him the second round tender at $4.3 million. I'm going to assume that Green Bay puts that on him and that he signs that. I've kind of gone over that already, but no other path really makes a ton of sense. They could do right of first refusal, but I think they'll bump it up to the second round tender to secure his services, and nobody's giving up a second round pick for him. Jake Hansen, this would be as an exclusive rights free agent. We're going to nuke that in just a second anyway, but this is where things kind of stand right now with the current state of the roster. This also includes what we're going to eventually need for the practice squad, about $3.45 million, and also includes a slush fund in season. For those of you who don't know, without getting too far into the weeds, anytime you put a player on injured reserve, anytime you sign, players throughout the course of the season that, you need to fill those injured reserve spots, anytime you elevate players from the practice squad, there's all additional money that goes into that. So you need more money as the course of the season goes along so that you have additional funds as needed so that you can get through the season and still have enough active players as players continue to get hurt throughout the year. So I'm putting aside about a $7 million slush fund through the course of the year. This carryover cap is negative $16 million. That includes carryover cap, dead cap, that from all the void contracts and things like that, salary cap adjustments, as well as workout bonuses. We're estimating a 2023 salary cap of $225 million. That hasn't been confirmed yet. Could be less than that, but we're going to go with 225 as of right now, which is going to give us a total working salary cap number for Green Bay of about $209 million if we're rounding up. Their current cap, now, detail here, when you're in the offseason, you only have to count the top 51 contracts. I always just count the 53. You're going to have to pay 53 eventually anyway. There is a little bit of extra flexibility that you can get when you're signing free agents by only having to go to 51. But at the end of the day, you have to get to 53 anyway by the time the season starts. So it's a nice little tool that you can use, but I'm always just kind of keeping it constant with 53 because you're going to have to get there, and just why not? There's no real advantage to it with the way that Green Bay's going to have to go about their offseason anyway, with keeping that slush fund anyway. So it just isn't relevant enough. So this is what the current salary cap would be with the 53, their top 53 salaries on the roster. And this is basically what you're looking at for effective salary cap space. Negative $36.7 million. That includes your $225 million salary cap, minus all the dead cap, the adjustments, the workout bonuses, the carryover cap. The total, which brings your total cap to here. And then you've got your practice squad, your slush fund, and your top 53 players, which again gives you an effective salary cap of negative $36 million. So clearly we have a lot of cleaning up to do. Meanwhile, we have the following players who are unrestricted free agents or their contracts were voided: Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard, Mercedes Lewis, Robert Tonyan, Dean Lowry, Jerron Reed, Justin Hollins, Eric Wilson, Corey Ballentine, Keyshawn Nixon, Adrian Amos, Rudy Ford, Dallin Levitt, Mason Crosby, and restricted free agents Tyler Davis and Chris Barnes. So those players are not even included in that negative $36 million. So if you want to bring back a Cobb, a Lazard, a Lewis, a Tonyan, a Jerron Reed, a Keyshawn Nixon, an Amos, a Ford, a Crosby, any of those guys, you're actually even worse off than the negative $36 million where Green Bay basically sits right now. So to say the least, Green Bay has some serious work to do to clear salary cap space. So we will take this one step at a time because, again, in today's scenario, we are trying to go all in and do everything that we can to win in 2023. So let's start off with some salary cap maneuvering, some cuts that Green Bay can make to clean this up a little bit. So first of all, anything that's not like a minimum salary, I'm going to see if I can start shedding some things off. So I'm going to get rid of Patrick Taylor's $940,000 salary. I'm going to get rid of Jake Hansen, or basically we're just not going to sign him to his exclusive rights free agent, if you want to look at it that way. Jonathan Garvin, I'm going to release. I'm going to have a dead cap hit of negative 19,000, no big deal, negative 20,000 basically. Ladarius Hamilton, I'm not going to bring back. And then Pat O'Donnell, I know this is for some reason, Pat O'Donnell's a sticky situation for some. People really like Pat O'Donnell. He was a below average punter. PFF had him as a below average punter. He's a below average punter statistically. He is 32 years of age, and you have the ability to get rid of this $2.4 million contract basically with only a $500,000 dead cap hit. When you want to go all in and you need every money possible to spend, every ounce of money possible to spend, you are going to want to probably move on from that contract. So I'm going to move on from Pat O'Donnell as well. So we are moving on very quickly from Patrick Taylor, Jake Hansen, Jonathan Garvin, Ladarius Hamilton, and Pat O'Donnell. And that is going to get us to... that's going to save us some money. I'll just put it that way. So that's going to get us a little bit lower on the contract scale and basically save us just a little bit of money. Nothing major, but it's going to help a little bit. All right, that's going to get us to some potential trades. Now, in this situation, I'm going to assume that since Aaron Rodgers is coming back, that Jordan Love is requesting and basically demanding a trade. Could they keep him? Probably, but maybe they're just like, you know what, this is a bigger issue. And if they're bringing Aaron back, they clearly don't believe in Jordan Love. I've went through that. Go back to my, I think, Sunday episode of the referendum on Jordan Love. Go back and listen to that. To me, if you're bringing back Aaron, it means that you probably don't believe in Jordan Love. So we are going to end up trading Jordan Love. More on that in just a moment. We're going to include Yosh Nijman in that trade. More on that in just a moment. And we're also going to trade Darnell Savage. I'll explain each of these individually. So the first trade that we are going to do is we are going to trade Jordan Love to the Indianapolis Colts along with Yosh Nijman, along with a conditional pick for Michael Pittman, the wide receiver, and a conditional pick from the Colts. There are so many reasons that I love this trade for both teams, especially the way that I'm about to condition it. So first of all, we can kind of look at Michael Pittman in the same vein as Chase Claypool. They've had similar sort of career arcs so far, good receivers, not great wide receivers. The reason that the Colts might be interested in this is for multiple reasons. A, they're going to have to negotiate a long-term deal with Michael Pittman, and that gets a little bit complicated because they don't have a quarterback and they don't have a window open right now to compete in. So signing a good but not great wide receiver to a massive contract is probably not something that they're super interested in doing at the moment. They also have Paris Campbell, Alec Pierce, so they have some wide receivers that can kind of pick up the slack, and they can also probably draft wide receivers and just start that process over as they go with a younger quarterback. So that's number one, is that it's a very similar Chase Claypool scenario. Remember, Claypool went for an early second round pick from the Chicago Bears. So keep that in mind. Meanwhile, the Colts are in desperate need of some young lottery ticket at quarterback. It doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't draft a quarterback or sign another quarterback to compete with Jordan Love, but they need lottery tickets. Think of it the same way that basically the Seahawks attacked the situation when they didn't have any quarterbacks. So they went and signed Matt Flynn from the Packers and then drafted Russell Wilson in the 3rd round. They're just looking for lottery tickets at that point. And I think they did Charlie Whitehurst as well. I think they actually did 3 quarterbacks, but they signed Whitehurst, they signed Flynn, and then they give they used a 3rd round pick on Russell Wilson. For the Colts, you're going to trade an existing wide receiver for Jordan Love. You're probably going to draft a quarterback in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round. Maybe you sign a more inexpensive, maybe you sign like a Taylor Heineke or somebody, and you just let those guys compete and hope that you hit on one of those 3 quarterbacks. For the Colts, it makes a ton of sense. They need those young quarterbacks. They don't have anything right now, and they're in desperate need for somebody who could potentially be the quarterback for that franchise. Meanwhile, their offensive line was an absolute mess, and getting a additional offensive tackle who could potentially be a starter, compete with their left tackle, and at least give them a swing tackle if nothing else. Maybe they could get creative with Braden Smith, move him inside if needed. It just gives them some additional depth. Meanwhile, Green Bay not probably super thrilled in an all-in scenario having to pay Yosh Nijman $4 million for one season, $4.3 million. So adding him in the trade doesn't hurt all that much. And here's where the fun comes in with the conditional picks. From a conditional pick standpoint, what Green Bay is doing here is they're basically going to give a conditional pick to the Colts if they re-sign Michael Pittman and if Jordan Love doesn't start games, maybe even up to an additional future 2nd round pick, meaning that Love didn't turn out for them and Pittman turned out great for Green Bay. That pick could, turn into a conditional pick up to maybe a 2nd or 3rd rounder for the Colts so that they're still getting something out of it. So worst case scenario for the Colts, if Love doesn't turn out, they still get a year of Love as a backup. They still get Yosh Nijman that they get a look at who can compete as a starting offensive lineman, and they could potentially get a future 2nd or 3rd round pick if Michael Pittman turned out for Green Bay. For Green Bay in that scenario, they lose Jordan Love, but he didn't turn out anyway. They lose Yosh Nijman, which they're probably not super hurt by. And that means that Michael Pittman turned out and they probably signed him to some extension. So Green Bay probably doesn't mind giving up the future pick in that situation. And remember, the future pick is less important because 2023 is what they're shooting for right now anyway. Meanwhile, the other way around works as well, where Green Bay gets a conditional pick, meaning that if Jordan Love turns out and he starts every single game and maybe has a certain win total, Green Bay could actually recoup, and they sign him to an extension, Green Bay could potentially get a 2nd or 3rd round pick in return, specifically in that situation if maybe Green Bay doesn't re-sign Michael Pittman. And that year, Green Bay gets a great wide receiver for a year in Michael Pittman. They lose Jordan Love, and he's gone on to great things with the Colts, which sucks, but at least they're going to get compensated with maybe some sort of 2nd, 3rd round pick in return because Jordan Love hit certain standards. So it really makes sense for both sides that they're going to get something out of this no matter what. And both sides have the potential to win in this trade where Green Bay is in an all-in win-now mode. They get a wide receiver that they need. And this is a creative way to find a wide receiver on a cheap contract, similar to what they were looking at with Chase Claypool a season ago. And personally, I like Pittman a little bit more than I even like Claypool and think Pittman could be very successful in this Packers offense. Losing Love sucks, but if he's great, you're going to get a conditional pick out of it. Losing Nijman, you don't lose much sleep over. So I really like this potential deal for both sides, and I think it makes sense for both sides. So we're going to take Jordan Love's salary away. We're going to have to take a $1.6 million cap hit for that. We're going to add on Michael Pittman's contract. The Colts take about $1 million of that from signing bonuses on their side of things, and then we're going to get rid of Yosh Nijman's salary. And then the other trade that we are going to do is we are actually going to make odd bedfellows with the Chicago Bears. This is another deal that makes so much sense for both sides. Green Bay in an all-in situation cannot, really have $7.9 million of Darnell Savage on their salary cap. That makes things extremely, extremely difficult. So, and his contract is fully guaranteed. The cool thing, though, is his contract is a fully guaranteed actual base contract and not a signing bonus, which means if you trade him, the team that trades for him takes on the entirety of that salary cap. So for the Bears, they have $100 million in salary cap. They're probably not just going to want to go and sign a bunch of players in one free agency pool and use all of that up in one fell swoop. That's probably not in their best interest to do all at once, which means they have the ability to actually get creative and take on salary in a trade and actually get a draft pick in return. Now, to make this work, Green Bay might have to take on like a player so that it doesn't look, because the league has sort of stepped in at times and like not been a huge fan of like salary cap dump trades. But if you trade Darnell Savage and a 4th round pick for a 7th round pick and just some throw-in player, that the league is going to have a harder time, because maybe just Green Bay can make the argument, hey, we just really like that player that we're acquiring. It would be some guy at the bottom like DeMarcus Gates, who's a practice squad guy for them. So let's just pretend it's Darnell Savage and a 4th round pick for a 7th round pick and DeMarcus Gates. We'll just say that. All right. In this trade, Green Bay moves Savage. They get off of his entire $7.9 million deal. They get a conditional 7th in a future season back in return. They get a linebacker that they're going to immediately release. And then they send out a 4th round pick. That stings. It stings to give up a 4th round pick. But in order to get off of Darnell Savage's contract and give you additional flexibility this year, I think it's very, very much worth it. From the Bears side of things, they have so much money that the $7.9 million cap hit barely registers for them. Meanwhile, they get a former 1st round pick on a 1-year deal who played better after getting benched last year, and maybe a change of scenery just does him really good. You don't necessarily hate taking on Darnell Savage on a 1-year prove-it deal if you're the Bears, and if he's awesome, you can re-sign him. You have his rights, and maybe you can work something out during the season. If he's not, you have all that money to spend anyway. It doesn't hurt anything, and you probably got a top 100 pick on your draft board simply by taking on Darnell Savage and gave up nothing of value in return. So for Chicago, it makes a ton of sense. And maybe Savage is extra motivated because the Packers traded him to a division rival. So for the Bears, I love it for Chicago. They get a legitimate former 1st round pick at safety and pick up arguably probably a top 100 pick on their draft board, and for nothing, but for a conditional 7th round pick, years, maybe next year down the road, and a linebacker that wasn't going to make the team anyway. For Green Bay, the big get is a significant decrease in your salary cap by almost $8 million that they're going to need that money so that they can go all in 2023. So just to recap, gone is Jordan Love, gone is Yosh Nijman, gone is Darnell Savage, in is Michael Pittman. There's some conditional picks. They lose a 4th round pick, but there's some conditional picks that they could get in return as well, depending on what happens. So with that, though, we saved the $7.9 million from Savage, almost $2.3 million from Love, $4.3 million from Yosh, and we take on a $3 million cap hit for Michael Pittman. All right, so let's get to our post-trade situation as well as our restructures. So before we get to our restructures, after those cuts, and after those trades, we are still negative $21 million in effective salary cap. So we still have a lot of work to do. That's where restructures come in. And remember, Brian Gutekunst had said that they're going to have to do a lot of restructures no matter what happens to get under the salary cap and make things work. Well, we are going to get ultra aggressive. And I should note here that I do not recommend this at all. I don't recommend this entire scenario. I don't recommend borrowing this much money from future salary caps, but this is where you can save a ton of money by using restructures and void years on some of these players. You could save almost over $11 million on Aaron Jones, $12 million on David Bakhtiari, $1.3 million on John Runyon Jr., $11 million on Kenny Clark, $8 million on almost $8 million on Rashawn Gary, almost $6.7 million on Preston Smith, $2.6 million on Devondre Campbell, $9.5 million on Jair Alexander, and $2.5 million on Rasul Douglas. And all of them stay on the team. This is where you get into the salary cap is fake, or you can always borrow money from the banana stand. There is a level of truth to the borrowing money from banana stand. It just gets harder and harder and harder as years go on. And taking this much money and all borrowing it from the future is going to catch up with them, I promise you. So don't recommend this. But if 2023 is now your year and you're bringing back Aaron Rodgers, you have the ability, let's add this up really, really quick because Excel is awesome. You have the ability to save almost $64.7 million by restructuring. And then you take, you're down about 21 million and you're going to save about 64.7 million. You can do the math. You're going to have about $43 million that you're going to be able to potentially spend and go out and re-sign some players and sign some free agents with. That is a totally different ballgame. As mentioned, should they do all of that? Probably not. Could they do all of that? They could probably do a really big majority of it. So we are going to go the ultra aggressive way. We are going to restructure all of those players and give them their minimum salaries that they could possibly hit for all of those players. Again, just one more time, in case you were wondering which ones. Aaron Jones, David Bakhtiari, John Runyon Jr., Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Devondre Campbell, Jair Alexander, and Rasul Douglas, all getting restructured. All right, so that brings us to bringing some players back. Now we've actually got some effective salary cap space to use. Aaron Rodgers is back. That means some of his friends are probably coming with him. Randall Cobb, we're going to bring him back. We're going to probably add some void years on top of this as well, which is going to keep his salary cap nice and low. Maybe it's just a 1 year, 1.25. Maybe that's within the realm of possibility, but he probably gets a little bit more than that, and they can use some void years there. Mercedes Lewis, same thing. Basically an effective 2.5 million salary cap hit, probably a couple void years on top of that as well. Jerron Reed, same thing, basically the same contract as he got last time, maybe a little bit of a bump up based on his performance this past season. Keyshawn Nixon, this might even be a little bit aggressive at $4 million. Really tough to gauge his market as the first team All-Pro kick returner. Also played well in the slot, also was great on special teams. So this is a little tough to gauge, but let's just say even ultra aggressively that it's around $4 million. You bring Rudy Ford back as a core special teams player. You bring Dallin Leavitt back as a core special teams player. And again, some of these might have some dead cap hits in future years, some void years on it in the future. But this is what we're just looking at right now is 2023 and what their salary cap hits would actually be. So now, after all those restructures and after bringing back some of those players, again, Leavitt, Ford, Nixon, Reed, Cobb, and Lewis, now you're looking at a total salary cap space still remaining of about $31.6 million. All right. Now comes the fun part. We've re-signed our players. Now we're going to go out and grab a couple free agents that we think we need to effectively add to this team to make it a Super Bowl contender. Once again, there's probably going to be some void years on top of these or just some longer contracts. These are probably going to be 3, 4, 5-year deals at the end. But I'm going to go out and I'm going to target two positions. I'm going to target tight end and I'm going to target safety. This could be an Evan Ingram, could be a Mike Gesicki. I'm going to go Evan Ingram in this scenario. That's going to take up a big chunk of salary cap. I'm also going to go Jimmy Ward at safety, a little bit older in age, not super concerned because we're focused on 2023. That's going to take up a good chunk of salary cap. Maybe you could go with a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, someone instead. Again, don't get caught up with the names. This is just an example of what they could do to sort of bolster this roster. I'm going to go a different direction at kicker. Greg Zuerlein coming off a really nice year for the Jets. Kicked outdoors, massive leg. He's gotten more accurate, especially specifically last year. And I think he would help with kickoffs. I think he'd help in the cold. And again, you have a little bit of a bigger leg than Crosby, a little bit younger than Crosby. I think this could potentially make some sense. So you go out and you get 3 players, Jimmy Ward, Greg Zuerlein, and Evan Ingram as your key free agent pickups. And we've still got some salary cap space to potentially play with. All right. So now we're going on to the next step, and that is the draft. All right. Again, don't get caught up in the names. I don't even know half of these players. Maybe there's 1 or 2 of them that didn't even, go pro. Like I'm not there yet. Let's just say that. Doesn't matter. I did this on, I think, I did it on one of the mock draft simulators, but we got Clayton Tune, a 5th-round quarterback to come in and compete. We got Kenny McIntosh, a 4th-round running back. We got Dante Demus, a 7th-round wide receiver. Darnell Washington, a 2nd-round tight end. We've got Peter Skoronski, the great offensive tackle from Northwestern in the 1st round. We got Byron Young, a 3rd-round defensive lineman. Gervarius Owens, a 7th-round safety. And we found our punter in the 7th round in Michael Turk. So that was our draft. Got a quarterback to compete, day 3 QB, day 3 running back to come in and be, bolster the depth chart a little bit. 7th round flyer at wide receiver, 2nd round tight end, 1st round offensive tackle, 3rd round defensive lineman to bolster that defensive line, and then a couple flyers at safety and at punter respectively. So that is the draft that we ultimately put together. That is getting a pick for MVS in the compensatory draft, but not having a 4th round pick because you ultimately traded it to get off of Darnell Savage's contract. So after that, still some salary cap space to play with. So maybe you get done with the draft and you realize, okay, we're a little bit thin at some positions though. We didn't really get an edge rusher in the draft. That didn't pan out. We didn't get, some depth at inside linebacker. Maybe there's a couple other spots that we would like to bring in some competition for. All right. And we're going to bring in an undrafted free agent class as well. So maybe you bring in like a Jeff Driscoll at quarterback to compete with Clayton Tune. Maybe you get some undrafted free agents at running back. Maybe you bring in a Scotty Miller. Again, the name doesn't matter, but just like a flyer at wide receiver to come in and compete with your existing players. Couple undrafted free agents at wide receiver, undrafted free agent at tight end, couple guards. You bring in Kyle Fuller to compete at center potentially. You've got an undrafted free agent here, undrafted free agent along the defensive line. You bring in Malik Reed at edge rusher. You bring in Justin Hollins. You bring him back, noticing that he's still on the free agent market, probably towards a minimum deal. Grab a couple undrafted free agents along the edge. You see Eric Wilson still out there. He was a good special teams player. You bring him back. You bring in an EJ Speed as a potential flyer just to see what he could potentially do as a competitive player in training camp. Couple undrafted free agents there. Couple undrafted free agents at corner, same at safety. Maybe you bring in a veteran punter to compete with your rookie 7th round pick, and maybe you bring in a veteran long snapper to compete with Jack Coco. Still, we've got some salary cap space available. And overall, we're starting to put together a pretty competitive roster. Now we get to 53-man roster cuts. Danny Etling is out. Goodson's out. Bo Melton, Scotty Miller's out. Austin Allen, Rasheed Walker, Kyle Fuller, Jonathan Ford, Chris Slayton, Justin Hollins, Eric Wilson, Shamar Jean-Charles, undrafted free agents. Pinion ends up not making it. You keep Turk instead. Coco's gone. Parker White's gone. And all of a sudden, you end up with your final version of this new 53-man roster that you're hoping can potentially compete for a Super Bowl. You've got Aaron Rodgers as your starter. You took a 5th-round flyer in Clayton Tune. You've got Jeff Driscoll as a potential backup, competing with Tune. You lose Love, you gain Tune and Driscoll. At running back, you lose Patrick Taylor. You gain Kenny McIntosh in the 4th round. Wide receiver, you've got Christian Watson, Michael Pittman, Romeo Doubs, Randall Cobb, and Samori Toure. Basically, you lose Lazard and gain Pittman. To me, that's ultimately a win. I think you get a little bit more of a playmaker there, and you're hoping for big steps from Watson, Dobbs, and Toure. And plus, you still are able to bring back Randall Cobb in that scenario. More importantly, you're bringing in Evan Ingram to give you a legitimate weapon at tight end as well. So it's not just about weapons at wide receiver. You've got a massive blocking tight end in Lewis. You get a 6'7" tight end who's probably your future Mercedes Lewis replacement, but can be a little bit more active in the passing game. And now you've got your pass catching tight end as well in Evan Ingram. You still got your H-back in DeGuara. You've got 2 great tackles in Bakhtiari and Skaronski. You've got 2 really good guards in Jenkins and Runyon. And then you've got Josh Myers as your starting center. And you can have Zach Tom compete with him. And you've also got Zach Tom as your super sub. You still have Royce Newman backing up. You're hoping for something from Sean Ryan. Maybe this is Rasheed Walker instead of Tenuta or Jones. You could go in a couple different directions there. Got a really strong 5-man defensive line rotation in Clark, Wyatt, Slayton, Reed, and Young. You've got Rashawn Gary coming back at some point. Maybe he's not ready to start the season, but Gary and Preston still along the edge, with Enigbare hopefully making a jump in his 2nd year. Malik Reed has started games in this league. He's a nice flyer as a number 4 guy. You've got Campbell and Walker as your starting 2. McDuffie is a nice backup. You get a flyer in EJ Speed. You've got Alexander, Stokes, and Douglas as your top 3 corners, with Keyshawn Nixon as your number 4, including as your star kick returner. Maybe you keep an undrafted free agent in that scenario. You've got Jimmy Ward at safety. And then I think a sleeper here is Ennis Gaines. He got legitimate playing time at the end of the year. I think you could pair him with Jimmy Ward, but you've got Tariq Carpenter to compete. Rudy Ford started legitimate games for this team. He could compete. You've got a flyer in Gravarius Owens. You could also put Nixon in the slot and put Douglas next to Jimmy Ward. You have some options there as well. So that could be something that you do. You've got Zerline at kicker, rookie at punter, a veteran long snapper to help you out at that position, and you still have salary cap space to play with, not to mention your $7 million slush fund and enough money on the practice squad. Now, with that extra money, maybe you have the ability to go out and maybe get another player at a key position. Maybe they're nervous about Bakhtiari and don't want to do any restructures and just keep his contract as is. That basically wipes out that entire $11 million. Maybe they're wanting to save a little bit more money to extend Rashawn Gary, extend Pittman in this scenario. Michael Pittman is somebody that maybe they want to extend. Maybe they just want to keep Darnell Savage and Yash Nyman. That would basically eat up that entire $11 million, and then you would have another offensive tackle in Yash Nyman. That would be your swing tackle, and then you would have Darnell Savage, starting across from Jimmy Ward. So there's some different things that could potentially come to fruition with that additional money. variety of different things that they could do. But this is just to give you an idea. These are all players that would not be back. They lost a 4th round pick. They gained a future Bears 7th. But these are all things that potentially they could do to really round out a roster and make it competitive in 2023. Now, you're going to need Aaron to play like Aaron. You're going to need some bounce back seasons from some key players like John Runyon Jr., like Josh Myers. Kenny Clark had a down year. Preston Smith had a down year. Campbell had a down year. Douglas didn't play like he did 2 years ago. Stokes had a down year. Alexander was up and down at the beginning of the year, up later. So you're going to need some guys to bounce back. You're going to need some things to go your way. Maybe like EJ Speed is this year's version of Devondre Campbell or Rasul Douglas, or they find another flyer type player that ends up turning out really, really well. So there's different things that they're going to need to hit. But if some things go right with a roster like this, yeah, I think you could be competitive in 2023. So like I said, I don't recommend it. I don't think borrowing that much money from future salary caps is wise at all for a 1-year all-in scenario. But could they do it? Yes. As I mentioned numerous times now, don't get caught up on the names. That $7.5 million for Evan Ingram could be a different high-priced free agent. The $6 million for Jimmy Ward could be a high-priced different free agent. That Skoronski first-round pick could be a first-round pick at another premium position. Maybe they get a safety in the first round or a tight end in the first round, and then they have that money to spend elsewhere. Maybe they bring in a veteran offensive tackle. Maybe they keep Yash, and maybe they go out and get who knows what else, right? The point isn't to say like they have to follow this exact blueprint, that they have to draft those players, cut those players, sign those players, trade those players. Some of it, of course, probably borders on the unrealistic. Clearly, this entire scenario is not going to happen. Michael Pittman, Jordan Love trade, your mileage may vary as to how realistic that sort of trade is. Maybe it's Jordan Love for Denzel Mims and a draft pick from the Jets, and maybe they instead spend a premium pick, or maybe they spend one of those big free agent contracts on a wide receiver rather than going a different route. So there's a lot of different things that could ultimately come to fruition here. My point in doing this today is to show you that there are levers that they can pull to open up salary cap space, and there are ways that they can make this team competitive in 2023. I think you're looking at a lot of the things that they're going to do this season. A lot of those restructures are probably the key thing that they're going to do to open up some space. I don't know how active they're actually going to be with signing big time free agents. I think that probably gets scaled back a bit. They're probably not going to trade Jordan Love for a Michael Pittman. But if you wanted a scenario of just like how all in they could go, this kind of opens the door and the window to show you this is sort of just how much they can push the envelope. Like I said, this is the first in a 2 to 3 part series that I want to do, examining what they would look like if they basically ripped the Band-Aid and went in an entirely opposite direction. And then maybe a scenario or two where we would see what would happen with a Jordan Love, but they bring back some guys, or an Aaron Rodgers, but they don't go all in. So we'll see what we end up doing, but make sure you're checking the Pack a Day podcast 365 days a year. I'll be right back here tomorrow with one of those scenarios. Make sure not to miss it. Make sure to subscribe. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.